I sat at the edge of the long oak dining table, my fork idle, my glass untouched. The clink of silverware and the low hum of conversation wrapped around me, but none of it reached my chest. Across from me, my sister beamed as our parents toasted her latest merger, their smiles wide and proud. No one looked at me. Not once. To them, I was still the failure, the brother who quit a cushy tech job to run some factory in the middle of nowhere. What they didn't know was that those factories had built me an empire for $1 billion. And tonight, I was done being invisible. The mornings in Millhaven were always the same, mist curling low over the cornfields, the hum of trucks already on the road, and the faint smell of iron drifting from the factories before the sun had even burned through the haze. That's when I liked to drive. My pickup was old, a 1999 Chevy with paint fading on the doors and a rattle in the dashboard I'd long since stopped hearing. I wore the same canvas jacket every day, oil stains on the cuffs, the kind of jacket people looked at and thought, that man never left this town. But I had. And I had returned by choice. Most mornings, I'd stop at the diner off Route 17 before heading into the first plant. Martha, the waitress, never bothered with a menu. Black coffee over easy eggs, wheat toast. She'd call out as I slid into the corner booth. She knew I liked to sit with my back against the wall, facing the room, phone in one hand, notebook in the other. It was there, between bites of runny yolk and the hiss of frying bacon, that I often drafted emails to my managers. We weren't just one factory anymore. We were 19 spread across 5 states. Some stamped out metal parts for automakers, some molded components for medical devices, others built engines powerful enough to run half a farm. I liked the numbers best. I kept them scribbled in thick notebooks, margins filled with arrows and underlines. Orders, shipments, payroll, margins, all of it scrawled in my own handwriting. People thought factory work was just grease and smoke. To me, it was rhythm, precision, 1,000 moving parts snapping into place if you listened hard enough. Still, when my mother called, she only asked the same question. "Alan, when are you going to do something with your degree?" She said degree, like it was some sacred thing wasting away in a drawer. MIT Computer Science, Stanford MBA. To her, that meant Wall Street or Silicon Valley, not backroads and welding masks. My sister fit that mold perfectly. Polished heels, crisp suits, a desk high enough to look down on anyone. Me. I shook hands with welders, wiped my boots at loading docks, and still smelled faintly of coolant when I came home. People in town respected me. They didn't know the numbers, but they saw paychecks arriving steady, new trucks in driveways, Christmas bonuses that bought kids braces and winter coats. I was proud of that. The satisfaction was quiet, steady, like the hum of the machines at night. But inside my family's home, none of it mattered. At dinners, they would ask my sister about strategies and shareholder calls. My father leaned forward, eyebrows high, nodding as if she were solving world hunger. When it came to me, the most I got was, "How's that little factory of yours?" Little. They said it like a hobby, like woodworking in a garage. Sometimes I wanted to pull out the balance sheets, slam them on the table, and shout, 12,000 employees. 19 factories. For $1 billion in revenue. But I never did. Instead, I'd just chew slowly, nod, and let them think what they wanted. I had learned early that silence carried more weight than arguing. People fill silence with their own assumptions, and my family's assumptions painted me small. Fine. Let them. Because while they were busy celebrating quarterly reports and catered luncheons, I was building something real. Something that could stand without them. Something that could outlast me. And someday, I knew, the truth would catch up. The first time I realized my family didn't take me seriously, I was 26. I had just left my job at Orion Tech, a sleek campus in San Francisco with free sushi bars and glossy lobbies that smelled like polished wood and ambition. People thought I was crazy. "You're walking away from stock options?" One coworker asked, his voice half shocked, half pitying. Maybe he was right. But I couldn't shake the feeling that my work there was smoke and mirrors, endless loops of code with no anchor to the real world. When I came home to tell my family, they didn't even pretend to understand. "You quit," my mother said, her voice rising in that way that made the word sound less like a question and more like an accusation. "I'm starting something new," I explained. "Manufacturing." I want to. Manufacturing? My sister Laura laughed, setting down her wine glass. Alan, that's industrial. Why would you waste your talent there? My father didn't laugh. He just stared at me over the rim of his glasses. You had a secure job, he said. A respectable job. Do you know how many people would kill for that? I tried to explain how I'd visited a plant outside of Detroit, how I saw machines sitting idle because no one had upgraded their systems, how supply chains were choking on inefficiency. I talked about the potential, the untapped billions waiting to be unlocked with just the right blend of technology and grit. But their eyes glazed over. To them, it was a step backward, not forward. That was the first cut. Small but sharp. The second came 2 years later, when Laura was promoted to vice president at her firm. We were at another dinner. Always dinners. Always at their house with the smell of rosemary chicken and the low murmur of classical music in the background. They toasted her with champagne. My mother's eyes shone with pride. When the glasses lowered, my father turned to me. And how's your little shop? He asked. Not factory. Not company. Shop. I told him about the new contracts we'd signed. The second plant opening in Ohio, the workforce growing from 80 to 200. He nodded politely, as though humoring a child explaining how his lemonade stand had sold out by noon. That night, I drove home in silence, hands tight on the wheel, the road stretching empty ahead of me. I remember thinking, why do I even bother explaining? The third betrayal cut deeper. It was at my cousin's wedding in Chicago. I hadn't planned to go. I was buried in work at the Indiana facility, installing new automation lines. But my mother insisted. Family comes first, she said. Funny how that only seemed to apply when it suited them. I showed up in my best suit, navy blue with polished shoes, even though I felt more myself in work boots and a jacket. The reception hall glittered with chandeliers, every table draped in white linen. During cocktails, a family friend asked me what I did these days. Before I could answer, Laura chimed in. Oh, Alan? He runs some factory out in the sticks. He likes it. She laughed lightly, the kind of laugh people give when they mean no harm, but cut all the same. The friend nodded, offered me a sympathetic smile, and moved on. I stood there with my drink, the ice melting fast, a sour burn at the back of my throat. That was the moment it clicked. They didn't just misunderstand me. They dismissed me. They needed me to stay small so their version of success, crisp suits, skyscraper offices, boardroom deals, stayed shining and untarnished. The betrayal wasn't just in the words they spoke, but in the way they refused to see. Still, the deepest cut came 5 years in, when I bought the plant in Millhaven. I had poured everything into that deal. Sleepless nights, endless calls, every dime of profit reinvested. When the ink dried, it was the proudest day of my life. I invited my parents to the opening. I showed them the floor, spotless, humming with new equipment, workers shaking my hand and thanking me. For the first time, I thought maybe they'd see what I saw. But after the ribbon was cut and the cameras packed up, my mother leaned close and whispered, Alan, don't you ever regret not doing something bigger with your life? Something bigger. I looked at the rows of machines behind her, at the men and women whose livelihoods depended on this place. My chest burned. That night, when I was alone in my office, I poured a glass of bourbon and sat in the dark. For a long time, I stared at the glowing numbers on my spreadsheet, shipments, contracts, payroll, proof of what I'd built. But the louder truth in my head was this. My own family would never believe in me. Not until I made it impossible for them not to. The invitation arrived on thick ivory paper, embossed in gold. My sister's handwriting sprawled across the envelope. Family dinner, Friday 7 p.m. Formal. I almost threw it away. But curiosity, and something sharper, something like spite, made me tuck it into my jacket pocket. Friday came, and I pulled my old Chevy into their driveway. The house glowed with warm lights, every window spilling golden rectangles across the manicured lawn. I sat for a moment in the cab, hands resting on the steering wheel, feeling the hum of the engine fade beneath me. Inside, the air smelled of roasted lamb and red wine. My mother greeted me with a kiss on the cheek, her perfume sharp and floral. Alan, you made it, she said, as though she hadn't been certain I would. Laura stood in the dining room, radiant in a tailored black dress. Her husband, Mark, poured champagne into tall flutes. Everyone laughed easily, their conversations full of deals and clients, mergers and expansions. I felt like a shadow at the edge of a spotlight. We sat at the long oak table, the one polished so often it reflected the chandelier like a mirror. Silverware clinked, glasses chimed, and I pushed lamb around my plate while the conversation spun around me. Laura closed on another acquisition, my father announced, his tone brimming with pride. 600 million. An extraordinary move. The table erupted in admiration. My mother dabbed her lips with a linen napkin, eyes glowing. Then inevitably the spotlight turned. And you, Alan, my mother said, her voice softer, indulgent. Still running that little factory of yours? There it was again. Little. Like the word was stitched into their vocabulary when it came to me. I forced a smile. It's going well, I said simply. Laura chuckled. Well. Come on, Alan, tell us the truth. I drove through Millhaven last month. That pickup of yours was parked outside the diner like always. I swear, you haven't changed a bit. Same jacket, same truck, same small-town routine. The table laughed with her, good-natured on the surface, but I felt the sting all the same. Mark raised his glass. Consistency is underrated, Alan. Though I can't imagine you've got much stress out there. Must be nice. I stared at the lamb cooling on my plate. My fork felt heavy in my hand. Inside, something twisted, old familiar anger rising like smoke. They thought I was harmless. They thought I was stagnant. They thought I had settled for scraps. No one saw the calls that started at 5 a.m., the negotiations that stretched past midnight, the 18-hour drives from one plant to another. No one knew the weight of 12,000 paychecks signed every 2 weeks, the decisions that shaped entire towns. To them, I was just a man in a rusty truck. I chewed slowly, willing my voice to stay even. It keeps me busy, I said. Laura smirked. Busy? You make it sound like a hobby. And then the trigger. The line that set everything burning. My father leaned back in his chair, swirling the wine in his glass. Alan, you're not getting any younger. Have you thought about doing something more respectable? Something that leaves a mark? You've got the education. You've got the brains. You don't want to waste them. Respectable. The word cracked through me louder than the clinking of glass, sharper than the knife in my hand. Something inside me shifted. Not a shout, not a snap. Something quieter, colder. Like a door finally closing. I looked at the faces around me. My parents, my sister, her husband. All of them shining with certainty, so sure of their place above me. For years, I'd let it pass. Let them believe I was small. Let them laugh. Let them reduce me. But not tonight. I set down my fork, the scrape of metal against porcelain cutting through the chatter. Slowly, I lifted my glass. My hand was steady. I think it's time, I said, voice calm, almost conversational. Time I told you what I actually do. The room stilled. Laura tilted her head, amused. My father frowned, as if bracing for another explanation he wouldn't respect. And in that silence, my pulse steadied. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of their dismissal. I was ready to show them. That night, long after the dinner plates were cleared and the house had gone quiet, I lay awake in my old bedroom. The same one I'd grown up in. Posters of galaxies still taped to the ceiling, books stacked lopsided on the shelves. The bed felt smaller now, the springs groaning under my weight. The clock ticked loud in the silence. Midnight. 1. 2. I closed my eyes, but every word replayed in my head. Little factory. Small town routine. Respectable. They echoed until my chest felt tight, as if the walls themselves were pressing in. For years, I had told myself it didn't matter, that their approval wasn't what I was chasing. I had the numbers, the contracts, the gratitude of workers whose kids could go to college because of the checks we signed. What more validation did a man need? But lying there, I realized it wasn't validation I wanted. It was recognition. The simple acknowledgement of reality. That I wasn't a failure, wasn't small, wasn't invisible. And if they refused to see it on their own, then maybe it was time to make them. I sat up, swinging my legs over the side of the bed. My hands rubbed my face, rough stubble scraping against my palms. I padded to the window, looking out at the quiet street where the same lamppost had flickered for 30 years. I thought of the nights in Indiana, standing on the factory floor at 2 in the morning, machines humming like an orchestra, my voice hoarse from shouting over the noise. I thought of the first time payroll nearly broke me, how I'd sold my condo in San Francisco just to make sure every worker got their check. I remembered the winter when 3 plants risked shutting down and I drove through snowstorms, begging suppliers for time, bargaining every cent until the lines kept moving. No one at that dinner table knew those nights. No one knew the sacrifices. But I did. And I couldn't let their version of me, the failure, the underachiever, be the one that lived on. At 3 a.m., I pulled out my phone and scrolled through photos. Not of vacations or family gatherings, but of ribbon cuttings, new machinery arriving on trucks, employees standing proudly in front of Christmas bonuses stacked in envelopes. I paused at one photo, a wide shot of the Millhaven plant, all the lights burning bright against the night sky. That was my life, my legacy, and I would not allow it to stay hidden any longer. I poured myself a glass of water from the bathroom sink, the cold shocking me awake, and sat at the desk by the window. My fingers tapped the wood, restless, impatient. I thought of Laura, her smirk, my father's voice, my mother's indulgent sigh. For years, I had kept my empire quiet on purpose. Low profile meant freedom. No endless reporters, no jealous relatives asking for handouts, no investors trying to dictate terms. Just me and the work. But silence had a cost. They had mistaken it for weakness. And now I realized my silence had lasted long enough. I could picture it clearly. The next dinner, their expectant faces, the moment I pulled out the truth. Not loud, not boastful, but undeniable. 19 factories, 12,000 employees, $4 billion in annual revenue. I could see their expressions shifting, disbelief, confusion, maybe even shame. It wasn't revenge I wanted. It was justice. The quiet justice of truth. By dawn, I hadn't slept a minute. My heart beat steady, not frantic now, but resolved. The sun broke slowly over Millhaven, painting the sky pale gold. Somewhere, a truck rumbled past on its way to the plant, a sound I knew like my own breath. I slipped on my canvas jacket, grabbed my keys, and headed out to the pickup. The air was sharp, damp with dew, the gravel crunching under my boots. As I slid behind the wheel, I thought, they wanted me small. They needed me small. But the truth is too big to stay hidden. I turned the ignition. The engine coughed, then settled into its familiar growl. And for the first time in years, I felt calm, because the decision was made. The next time we sat at that oak table, I wouldn't be invisible. I would be undeniable. Preparation, for me, never began with speeches or plans. It began with silence. With long drives between plants, headlights cutting through the dark, my mind running the numbers over and over. In the weeks after that dinner, I carried their words with me everywhere. Little factory. Respectable. They clung like burrs, scratching at me in the quiet hours. But instead of breaking me down, they sharpened me. If I was going to reveal the truth, I wanted it to be undeniable. Not a story they could dismiss, not a claim they could laugh off. Cold, clear facts. So I started gathering. I pulled every quarterly report from the past 5 years. Revenue growth curves, payroll ledgers, employment numbers. I called my CFO, asked him to prepare a portfolio as though we were courting investors. He didn't ask why. He trusted me enough to just do it. At night, I spread the documents across my kitchen table, the wood scarred with years of coffee rings and pen scratches. The papers formed a mosaic. Contracts with Fortune 500 companies, letters of commendation from mayors, tax records that proved we weren't just surviving, we were thriving. But every time I looked at those numbers, I remembered the nights when survival wasn't certain. Like the winter of '09, when metal prices spiked overnight. I sat in my office with my head in my hands, knowing payroll was due in 48 hours and the bank had already turned me down. That night, I drove 3 hours through sleet to meet a supplier in a greasy diner. I begged him for 90 days of grace. He gave me 30. I stretched it into 90 by cutting my own salary to nothing, living on diner coffee and dollar burgers until the storm passed. Or the fire in the Indiana plant, the one that nearly gutted us. I remember the stench of burned rubber clinging to my jacket, my throat raw from smoke. The insurance company tried to wriggle out of paying, claiming negligence. For weeks, I fought them, line by line in the contract, until the check finally came through. We rebuilt in record time, workers showing up with hammers even before the walls were dry. Those weren't the kind of stories my family wanted to hear. They wanted polished headlines, glossy magazine covers. But I knew, when I finally spoke, I'd carry those scars in my voice. And maybe for once, they'd hear what it really cost. Still, doubt not at me. What if they didn't believe me? What if they laughed again, dismissing the empire as luck, as exaggeration? What if even with the numbers in front of them, they refused to see? There were nights I almost gave up on the idea of telling them. Nights I sat alone on my porch, bourbon glass in hand, the cicadas screaming in the dark, wondering why I even cared. But then I'd think of the workers. Of Tom, who'd pulled me aside once and said, "Because of this job, my daughter's the first in our family to go to college." Or Maria, who cried when she got her first Christmas bonus, hugging me so tightly I could barely breathe. They believed in me. They saw me. So why couldn't my own blood? That became the fuel. Not anger anymore, but something steadier. A quiet determination. I decided the reveal had to be clean, impossible to twist. Not a boast, not a brag, just truth laid bare. So I rehearsed. Alone in my office, I practiced saying the numbers out loud. 19 factories. 12,000 employees. 4 billion in annual revenue. Simple. Direct. No decoration. The first few times, my throat tightened, like the words would choke me. But the more I said them, the lighter I felt. Then came the setback. A journalist from Midwest Business Weekly called, asking for an interview. They'd caught wind of our growth, wanted to do a feature on the quiet manufacturing revival. Normally, I would have declined. I hated publicity. But part of me thought, maybe this is the perfect proof. If my family saw it in print, they couldn't deny it. I agreed. The interview went well. I spoke carefully, highlighting the workers, the communities, not myself. The article was scheduled for the following month. But when it came out, Laura was on the cover of Forbes the very same week, grinning beside a headline about billion-dollar mergers. My article was buried in the regional section, black and white, half a page. My parents never mentioned it. I doubted they even saw it. That night, I felt the old doubt claw back. What if nothing I did ever cut through? I walked the factory floor at Millhaven to clear my head. The machines roared, sparks flying from welders, the scent of hot metal thick in the air. One of the workers, a kid barely 20, stopped me. "Mr. Reed, can I just say, I'm proud to be here." I nodded, throat tight. That was the moment I knew the reveal wasn't about my parents. Not really. It was about me. About standing in my own truth, whether or not they accepted it. So I doubled down. I had my assistant prepare a sleek, bound book, black leather cover, our logo embossed in silver. Inside, photos of the plants, graphs of growth, stories of employee milestones. A portfolio not just of numbers, but of lives changed. I kept it in my desk drawer for weeks, fingers brushing the cover whenever doubt crept in. Then the call came. Another family dinner. Another chance to sit at that oak table and be dismissed. Except this time, I wouldn't be silent. This time I'd bring the book. And when the moment came, I'd lay it down in front of them. Not as a weapon, but as the truth. The second family dinner came on a Saturday in early spring. The air outside carried the faint bite of winter still. But inside their house the fire crackled warm. The smell of garlic and rosemary drifting from the kitchen. I arrived in my pickup as usual, canvas jacket zipped against the chill. Laura's BMW and my father's Lexus gleamed side by side in the driveway, polished enough to catch the fading sun. Inside, it was the same ritual as always. Coats taken, champagne poured, smiles fixed in place. The oak table stretched long under the chandelier, silver polished until it hurt the eyes. They talked, as ever, of Laura's firm. Another merger, another round of applause. I sat quietly listening, hands folded in my lap, the black leather book resting heavy in my bag at my feet. The moment came midway through the meal. "So, Alan," my father said, wiping his mouth with a linen napkin. "Still at the factory?" His tone was light, casual, but the familiar sting landed all the same. Laura smirked, sipping her wine. Factory life suits him. Simple, steady. Right, Alan? The laughter rippled around the table, soft but sharp. I let it settle. Let the silence stretch, the weight of it pressing down until they shifted in their seats. Then I reached down, lifted the book from my bag, and laid it on the table. The thud of leather on wood cut clean through the chatter. "What's this?" my mother asked, eyebrows raised. I met her gaze. My voice was calm, almost too calm. "It's what I actually do." I slid the book toward them, opening the first page. Photos filled the spread. Aerial shots of vast plants, workers in hard hats, trucks lined up for shipment. "This is Millhaven," I said. "Our flagship. 1,200 employees." Next page. "That's Indiana, rebuilt after the fire. Ohio, Kentucky, Michigan, 19 in total now." My father leaned closer, squinting at the graphs, the numbers climbing steadily year after year. His hand froze on the page. "Annual revenue." I continued, my voice steady. "$4 billion. 12,000 paychecks every 2 weeks. Contracts with Ford, GM, MedTech. We supply parts for half the tractors in this state. And in 3 towns, our plant is the largest employer. Without us, those communities die." The silence was heavy now. Only the crackle of the fire filled the room. Laura's glass hung frozen halfway to her lips. "4 billion, she whispered. "Yes." She laughed, but it was thin, brittle. "You're exaggerating. Factories don't make that kind of money anymore." I turned another page. Tax records. Auditor signatures. Letters from governors. My father's face paled. He read the numbers again, his lips moving without sound. This can't be right," he said finally. "It's right," I said. "It's been right for years." My mother pressed her napkin to her mouth, her eyes wide. She looked at me as though seeing me for the first time. And for once, I didn't fill the silence. I let it sit. Let the weight of truth press into the room, into their bones. Finally, Laura spoke again, her voice sharp now. "Why didn't you tell us?" I looked at her, at the sister who had spent years reducing me to a punchline. "Because you never asked to understand. You only wanted to believe I'd failed." She blinked, stunned into stillness. My father shut the book slowly, his hands trembling just slightly. "All these years," he cleared his throat, voice rough. "Why keep it hidden?" "Because I didn't need your approval," I said softly. "But don't mistake my silence for failure. I built something real. Something that matters." The fire popped, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. No one spoke. I leaned back in my chair, the steady hum of calm in my chest. For the first time in my life, I wasn't defending myself. I was simply stating fact. And in their silence, the stunned, heavy silence of people who could no longer deny what stood before them, I felt lighter than I ever had. The truth was out. And nothing they said, or didn't say, could take it back. The silence after that dinner stretched for days. No phone calls, no texts, no sudden apologies. Just absence. The kind that felt deliberate, like they didn't know what to say, so they chose nothing at all. At first, I thought the quiet might bother me. But instead, I found peace in it. For years, I'd longed for their approval, begged silently for a nod, a word, a sign that I mattered. Now I didn't need it. I had spoken my truth, laid my life bare on the polished oak table they'd once used to measure my failures. Whether they believed it, admired it, or resented it, that was theirs to carry, not mine. The following week, I walked through the factory floors in Indiana. Machines roared, sparks flew, workers moved with the rhythm of years of practice. A woman named Carla waved as I passed. She'd just closed on her first home thanks to her steady paycheck here. In Ohio, I met a young man who told me his father had worked at our plant for 20 years, and now he was starting in the same place. These were my people. This was my family, 12,000 strong. People who didn't care about cocktail parties or polished silverware. People who cared about roofs over their heads, food on the table, futures for their children. For the first time, I realized I didn't just build factories. I built lives. A month later, Laura called. Her voice was tight, rehearsed. "Alan, we should meet. Talk things through." I agreed, though not for her sake. For mine. We sat in a cafe downtown, far from the echo of our parents' house. She wore her usual tailored suit, nails painted a glossy red, phone buzzing constantly at her side. "You blindsided us," she said. I sipped my coffee. "Or maybe you were too blind to see." She winced but didn't argue. Instead, she leaned forward. "Why didn't you tell me? We could've. I don't know, collaborated. Combined networks." I shook my head slowly. Because this isn't about merging empires. You build skyscrapers. I build foundations. They're not the same thing.